Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hi, good evening and good afternoon and good morning. It's indeed my pleasure to be here this evening, and a big thank you to the Carnegie Endowment Foundation for organizing this event and giving me this opportunity to share and to have a conversation with some exciting people on the panel. UPI has been the topic of digital payments is indeed interesting, and it's very topical. UPI, on the other hand, has got a lot of people's attention here in India, and had to have a conversation on UPI with the phenomenal panelists is going to be quite interesting. It's over 2 billion transactions in UPI. It's about $50 billion worth of payments that happen on UPI today. It's a phenomenal success, and it's actually been attracting a lot of attention. It was just, I think, yesterday where Mark Zuckerberg mentioned about UPI being so important. Then I think a couple of days ago, Mr. Gates also mentioned about UPI, and it was not, I think maybe a couple of months ago, Google spoke about or made a reference of UPI to the Fed, saying that this is something interesting to work on. And so it's been a great success. And I think we'll have an interesting conversation about the UPI here. And while Ritesh will give us a lowdown on the UPI, I just wanted to share some of my thoughts because, we've been part of the payments ecosystem here in India for almost 2 decades, and we've seen a lot of things happen here. So a couple of things about the UPI and why we think it has become such a great success. And normally, when something is so successful, one can talk about the fact that it's a great product, it's a great technology. It's got I would say the government in India has been pushing digital payments a lot. But I think there is another critical factor to the success of UPI, which is the participants. I think what UPI has managed is it's managed to create a new layer of participants. And this layer of participants has been driving the phenomenal success that UPI is all about. And I think it's very interesting to see the panel here today. We are talking about payments, and there is no bank. I think that's what has happened in the last 4 or 5 years, that the narrative has completely shifted away from the bank. And it's the non-banks who've started participating in this ecosystem. And they are the ones who are bringing about a lot of change that is taking place. Whether I think Abhijit will talk about what WhatsApp is doing, or Mahendra will talk about a perspective from Amazon, which is very different because they are a user as a big platform in the form of Amazon.in, the platform. And then they're also a provider of payment services. So he can give us a dual perspective on how, as a merchant, to look at UPI and otherwise. But just stepping back, UPI has been greatly successful. So has been M-Pesa in Kenya. I think the interesting thing is to figure out, will there be a second M-Pesa and will there be a second UPI in a different market? So Ritesh has this interesting job to see how he gets UPI to be successful in some other geography. Like, we keep hearing and talking about M-Pesa, but there was never a second M-Pesa. So I think we have an interesting panel. We'll get a perspective from Victor about the M-Pesa story and how the UPI story fits in. We'll have Ritesh talk about a bit about UPI and then how he's looking to make it successful. Abhijit, on the other hand, they have a phenomenal platform. How that platform and UPI gets leveraged to do new things in India is, I think, where Abhijit would come in. And Mahendra Nerurkar, actually, he sits in the center of all this because he has the advantage of both sides of the story. And then Ms. Piak, she'll give us a broader perspective on how the UN looks at some of these things from an inclusion perspective. Because, actually, UPI has democratized a lot of payments. So I think we have an interesting panel. I think everybody here is, I think they understand and they know this whole subject really well. So it'll be a good conversation to have. I just want to also mention one point, in this entire thing in India, UPI runs without anybody earning anything or paying anything. So how maybe Mahindra can talk about how this helps and how this is a problem also, because there are two sides to the story always. It helps, but then it also creates a bit of I would say, an economic model mismatch. So those are my opening comments, and I think it's a phenomenal product. Particularly, in it's just about nearing 4 years, and in 4 years to have 2 billion transactions in a month is a phenomenal outcome. So with this as the background, I think maybe Ritesh can start by giving everybody a small background about the UPI, so that people by large can understand, and then we can get into other points and have everybody talk about their views. But Ritesh, please go ahead.
Ajay, thank you for the question, and I'll do my best to kind of simply explain what UPI is. So simply speaking, I mean, UPI is an application layer that actually is enabling third party as well as bank owned wallets connect with any bank account in India, and actually enabling consumers carry out P2P as well as P2M transactions. Now that's the beauty of it. It's a very kind of simple explanation. Now, in terms of key features, I think there are 7 things that I would like to highlight. One is it's API driven, so it's easy to integrate. It is interoperable, so it's driving inclusion at an ecosystem level. It is real time, so it ensures fast, quick movement of funds between the parties. It runs on aliases, so you don't need to share bank account, card number, and other stuff. That thereby it kind of gives you convenience, it gives you simplicity, safety, and security. Then it operates on open banking ethos because apps can be mapped to any bank account in India. So there is no need to reload funds, which is the case in some of the wallets. So that's important. And then it can be integrated to multiple channels to kind of offer consumers the choice. We also have a USSD mode. So giving consumers across the spectrum, people who do not even have a smartphone, the choice to transact. And finally, as you mentioned earlier, it's a collaborative engagement model, which actually allows participants in the ecosystem to innovate in UI as well as UX space to drive traction, to drive adaptability, and to reach the last mile. So I think these are some of the points that are kind of stand out for UPI. And having created such a kind of hero product, if I can use the term, we are also continuously focusing on the evolution, and that evolution is coming up by adding newer use cases. So by use cases, I mean, let's say we recently introduced recurring payments on UPI. We also have a invoice in a box solution, which actually allows merchants share the invoice for the services rendered along with a payment request. So that gives a lot of visibility to consumer on what the payment is being asked for. And then one-time mandates for pre-authorization kind of payments. So that's in nutshell is UPI in terms of the key features and how it's serving different use cases and touching on the different parts of the Indian consumer, I would say.
Yeah, so Ritesh is being modest in mentioning all these things, but it's actually caught on to people's fancy, and they on an average people are using it more than or close to 20 times in a month. So it's a very interesting story that we have, and I think it would be nice to get in Mr. Victor to talk about the M-Pesa offering in Kenya, and compare and contrast that with UPI, and what's the use case for an offering like this in Kenya from the vantage point that he has in this ecosystem. On average, people are using it more than or close to 20 times in a month. So
thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to have a conversation about UPI in comparison to M-Pesa here in Kenya. I'm just going to begin by giving an outsider's perspective of the platform. Thank you. And from what I'm able to observe is that this platform has got, I would call it, universal access, in that you do not need to, for example, have a wallet or an account within the platform to be able to leverage this and to access your bank account. So that, utility concept, that it's almost like electricity or water where you can plug into a payments platform or system, I think for me is very exciting. Also, the fact that it is not profit, I don't believe maximizing profits is one of the key, objectives. So in terms of access to the excluded, I think that presents a very exciting opportunity, especially where you are reaching those who would normally be excluded, because it does not make economic sense to access them. Again, also for smaller players, it appears that it would be much easier for smaller players to access a much wider market by plugging into the wider payments infrastructure. Having said that, when I compare this to other markets, for example, in Africa, I'll first start by quoting our former head of national payments, who said that, our national payments system is like a superhighway, and every time you want to upgrade or extend this road, there is always an obstruction, either a supermarket or a petrol station that is in the way. So there are challenges when you're working in my view, in a market that is already, should I say, fairly well covered. So there will be, in my view, some challenges from existing players who would want to leverage their investment, their first mover advantages, and this, to some extent, would present, in my view, some challenges. The other area that I would want us maybe to look at is around continuous innovation, because there is this view that private sector will continue to invest in innovation, maintenance. So how would that be assured? And then maybe also the issue of, and I use this word very carefully, a monopolistic presence. How would that be catered for in order to continue to encourage competition and for other players to enter the market? So let me stop there. And I'm really glad to be here today. Thank you. Infrastructure. Having said that,
Ajay, you're on mute.
Mr. Victor, I just wanted to request you to stop the YouTube feed that you're getting. Okay, so I think Victor has highlighted a few interesting and relevant points, which is around how do existing players behave when some such, I would say, event happens, which is almost like a disruption in the whole payments ecosystem. And we'll get Ritesh and Abhijit respond to some of these things. And I think just to talk about this last point which Victor mentioned, which is around monopolies. Victor, here in India, the Reserve Bank in India has put out an option for people to set up another central or apply for national payment system, the ability to set up national payment system. So they've opened it up for more people to participate in over the next, I would say, 6 odd months. But moving on, I think given Abhijit is the newest, that's WhatsApp is the newest scale player, which is entering this ecosystem. So I think it'll be interesting to get his point of view on how he looks at the UPI framework. And I think Victor mentioned about how it democratizes things. and how Abhijit is looking at WhatsApp adding scale and widening the funnel as far as the use of UPI is concerned. Abhijit.
Sure. Thanks, Ajay, and thanks to Carnegie for having me here. It's great to be with this panel. I think you bring up a couple keywords. So democratization is absolutely one of the most innovative things that's coming out of here. I did want to kind of counteract one point that we made earlier, and I think this is key. UPI is built on the basis of banks. So actually what is not happening is new players and applications coming and kind of taking away from the banks. In fact, I think what's novel about UPI and the architecture that we've built here in India is the fact that it is actually creating a bunch of horizontal layers. And it actually unlocks the power of each component in each layer to innovate and scale. So what I mean by that is, at the base of all of this, and what's most important is that we're building on the banking framework of India. And so somebody who's opened up a bank account now has access to all of these services, whether it's your traditional banking or whether it's next-gen services like UPI. On top of that, we've created a well-architected set of public services, whether it's not just UPI, but I think what's important here is the India Stack framework itself. So for those who aren't familiar with India Stack, what we've done is create a set of API-based services, whether it's identification, whether it's payments, whether it's documentation, that can all be called and plugged together as common components by anybody. Sitting on top of that are platforms like us and others who can help distribute and remove friction from the system. And then on top of that is the ecosystem where innovation can happen. And the beauty of this architecture is that we have the rigor and kind of stability of the banking system at the underpinning everything. We've got the public services that actually democratize all of this. So what was vertical in the past is now horizontal and available to all. Platforms that have scale, whether it's on the consumer side or on the merchant side, can now reduce a lot of the frictional loss that happens as we try and scale payments or scale services. And you have now the ability for not even us, but an ecosystem to innovate. So the perfect solution, which probably never could have gotten from, let's say, a financial hub like Mumbai to a rural villager who wants to do financial inclusion because of distribution costs and cost of acquisition, we're taking care of all of that. And now we really have a chance to kind of explode the number of services that can reach everybody who wants it. I think that's what's exciting. And that's the role that WhatsApp has to play here, not replacing banks and not actually necessarily being the innovation. We want to be the kind of platform through which consumers can find whatever service they want. And I think the message we keep saying is like, look, our job as an ecosystem isn't to scale payments. Scaling payments isn't the objective. Scaling access to services is the objective. And so you need all of these things to come together so that we can deliver that. And I think that's what's most exciting and also very, very replicable in the world of API and microservices that we all have the opportunity to live in right now.
Oh, that's interesting. And so I think when Victor started talking, just for the benefit of the audience, UPI, like the way I think everybody is familiar with the card. Like a card is an alias for your bank account. UPI is also an alias for your bank account. It is like a card number, which was a 16-digit number. A UPI handle is an alphanumeric number, and you can choose it. Almost all of it you can choose. So, and it's like an alias, but as Ritesh mentioned, it's been made in the last 3-4 years. So it's more flexible. It's available on the phone. It uses a different set of rails, and therefore it gives flexibility for people to work on. I think at this point, it'll be interesting to hear what Mahendra has to say, because Mahendra, I think you should give everybody a perspective on you as a provider of payment services and you as a user of these payment services also. So I think you could give the audience here a great perspective on how such a large organization like Amazon uses it, and also uses it as a business, but uses it also as an enabler for your business. Mahendra, please.
Sure. Thanks, Ajay, and thanks for having me here. I think, what we have heard so far from everyone, right, is just the solid founding principles based on which this payment system has been created. And I think what is most exciting about it is perhaps the most, like, the slickest product that has come out in a long time. If you just think about the consumer and an average consumer wanting to send money to his family living across the country, previously would have earned in cash, gone to a local money transfer shop, put the money in there, transferred the money. It would have probably taken half a day to just make that money transfer happen. And what has changed completely overnight is just with the access to a mobile phone, he's now able to access his bank account, set up the beneficiary, and do that transfer instantly. He doesn't have to worry about, is it a weekend? Is it outside of office hours? Will this go through? There are certain limits, but it's an instant 24/7 real-time single relationship through which you can do P2P, P2M, all of that. And then on the merchant side, it's the fastest way to get set up to accept payments, right? You don't have to have a big machine. You don't have to pay fees. So it's the easiest way to enable acceptance. So if there was ever a experience that could displace cash, and as you guys know, India is an economy where roughly 80-90% of people earn in cash. Until very recently, more than 90% of merchants only accepted cash. So you had to invent a solution that was a credible alternative to cash. It has to be as universally accepted. It has to be as easily accessible. It has to have the 100% success rate that cash has. So I think building a secure, resilient system that enables ubiquitous acceptance, I think, was the challenge, and I think UPI has stepped in to solve it beautifully. And all layers, at the technology layer, even in the way NPCI is organized, I think it's a beautiful end-to-end architecture for all of us to learn from in how to build great products. I think in terms of how we see it from the Amazon vantage point, Ajay, is as a merchant, particularly an online shopping site in India, as I mentioned, cash is very prevalent. Customers are still kind of waking up to e-commerce. They are not yet fully there in saying that, hey, will I get the right product? Will it arrive on time? So customers do tend to defer their payment, if you will, because they're not yet sure about the payment experience. They're not yet sure about the marketplace experience. Traditionally, the payments methods that we had that were used for online banking used to have very high failure rates. And there were multiple innovations that people were trying out, including wallets, etc., that were being tried out to address these problems. But again, like if there were one solution that could help us leapfrog, where a customer can genuinely, because in the case of the previous payment methods, if the customer wanted a refund, it would take several days. So it is not just about the success rate of the transaction, money going out, it's also the money coming back would take forever. And I think what UPI has done is it's really not only made the act of paying simple, but if something goes wrong, the refunds are instant. So what this does for us as a merchant is it allows us to establish that equity, that trust with the customer, that they can prepay for their items a lot more, because otherwise as a merchant, we carry the item all the way to the customer's home and the customer says, hey, I'm not at home, take it back, or I don't have change, take it back, or I changed my mind, take it back. So that does impact very substantially the economics of an e-commerce platform. So from a merchant perspective, it is very exciting that we have a payment method that is so robust end to end, that is so accepted and scaling so rapidly. And so we do see it as a very important part of our payment experience for the marketplace going forward. Now, beyond that, I think what starts to emerge is once you create that UPI relationship with Amazon or Amazon Pay, it allows the customer to engage with use cases beyond shopping. So now I can suddenly pay my bills, I can transfer money, I can pay for a food delivery order, and so on and so forth, movie tickets and all of that, right? And what that does is it allows us to build a higher level of rapport with the customers, higher level of engagement with the customers, which overall kind of helps the flywheel spin even faster, because the way we look at it is our core flywheel indexes on three inputs: selection, price, convenience. What we are able to do through UPI is unlock even more selection of digital payment categories, right? So till now, you could think about, hey, when you think about Amazon, you think electronics, fashion, books. Some Prime members would think about video. What UPI does, it instantly unlocks a whole new segment of selection, which customers previously did not think about Amazon for. And so the same principle of the flywheel holds for us, where you add more selection, customers find you more relevant, and they keep coming back. So I think that's kind of how we view it from a perspective of engaging customers. And then as you kind of look forward further ahead, it does create newer exciting opportunities in the payments and the financial services spaces as well, because now you can start to leverage those relationships to offer more services to customers as well as to merchants, to make their payment experience or their overall to serve their financial needs, whether it is in terms of credit, insurance, more and more. So I think as we think about ourselves not just as a shopping marketplace, but a enabler of services and products for consumers and for merchants. Previously, we used to serve merchants who had a persona of a seller on the marketplace. Previously, we used to serve consumers who had the persona of a shopper on our marketplace. What UPI has allowed us to do is expand that definition a little bit more broadly, where now we look at the consumer as a shopper plus a payer, and we look at the merchant as a seller plus a payment merchant. And that creates very exciting opportunities for us to serve them more. And I think Abhijit kind of nailed it. Is like we are not in the business of expanding payments. That is a natural byproduct. We are trying to help both the consumer and the merchant side. Like we are trying to serve both of them better beyond sort of the e-commerce definition that our marketplace had. So it's super exciting, and the early signals of UPI and how it is scaling is just amazing.
I can see Ritesh smiling all the way, I think, to the bank, if not anything else. But yeah, I think it's really exciting. And I would like to now get in Pia to talk about UPI or payments first as the necessity from an inclusion and from an inclusive growth perspective, because she sits in a very different place. She sits as part of the United Nations Secretary General's office, and she gets a very ringside view of what's changing in the world and how some of these little changes that take place somewhere down in South Asia, which is India, how it begins to filter up to United Nations, and how sitting there one looks at some of these events that happen, and how this could help in bringing about more people getting included into the financial ecosystem. Pia, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Ajay. And first of all, thank you to Carnegie India for inviting the office to be here at this panel. Very interesting and promising discussions for sure. Maybe just to take a step back and provide a perspective of our office. So Her Majesty Queen Maxima of the Netherlands is the UN Secretary General's Special Advocate for Financial Inclusion for Development. And in this role, she is the leading global voice in advocating for inclusive financial systems that lead to development outcomes. So she advocates at the global level, and she also advocates to key decision makers at country level. And so, just from that perspective, I'd like to highlight three things that stand out in this discussion. So first is really one of her key messages as an advocate is the importance of what she calls digital public goods that can provide, it's a set of necessary policies, infrastructure that can enable, fintechs, for example, to flourish, but more importantly for digital finance ecosystems to be more inclusive. So these digital public goods range from, connectivity, which is still an issue in many parts of the world, to interoperability of products and providers, to digital IDs, to policies, enabling policies and regulations, digital literacy, even in consumer protection and cybersecurity frameworks. So these have to be in place so that, really the development of these systems become inclusive. And what I'm hearing here with the UPI experience is that all these pieces are coming together, building off from the India stack, and really providing value to very strong value proposition. So that is the first message that she shares, to countries, to key decision makers, and even on global level. And I think India is a very good example of where these digital public goods have been holistically and strategically put in place. In fact, when Her Majesty visited India in 2018, she highlighted the possibility or the importance of India really becoming that global knowledge hub, if you will, for implementations in other countries. And she carries some of the messages and learnings from this visit to when she visits other countries. And maybe, Ajay, to just give you, a little personal experience as well, prior to joining the Office of Her Majesty, I was in the Philippine Central Bank for nearly 20 years. And, our office actually visited India to learn about, the digital ID. And we're now in the process of a digital transformation roadmap. And definitely a lot of these learnings that you were talking about will feed into how systems will be designed. And so the potential of just peer learning and knowledge exchange that Her Majesty also pushes for, I think is very ripe and unique for this case, and especially for the UPI. And finally, the third point will be, and I think Mahendra and Abhijit discussed this very clearly, that it's not just about increasing transactions and and making payments available and making it more efficient, but really creating a good value proposition. But I'd like to take providing a wider range of services and options for consumers. But I'd like to take that further and say, really, to what extent? And Her Majesty's message here is that all of this should lead to positive outcomes. So really including those who were not reached before, for example, or really enabling small merchants to be digitized and now have, the possibility of participating in, reaching markets through e-commerce, for example. In fact, when Her Majesty visited India, she met with the Dabawalas to see how, because of the digital payments, they were able to collect and be more efficient in their services. So this is to what extent, to what end do we really do this? And from her perspective as special advocate, she really wants to see that the design of this infrastructure, it's important to have all this in place, the open governance framework, the public-private collaboration, for example, the API standards, but putting this all in place so that it works well, and it works well for those who need it the most. And, these are the sectors that are left excluded and are vulnerable. And I think the pandemic highlights just how important these measures are to be able to reach those segments. And going back to the digital public goods discussion, we really saw that it is in those countries where these public goods were present, where government was really able to respond and provide assistance and support for resilience for those who were affected. So just those 3 points as a perspective from the UNSGSA's office on all the discussions today. Ajay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very nice, I would say, well-articulated perspective from the outside in, and thank you very much. It's quite interesting. Coming back to the job on hand, which is around UPI, I think I want to get in Ritesh, and I think the conversation that we were to have has also got some bit of a tinge on how one internationalizes UPI. So Ritesh, we'd be keen to hear how you are thinking about, or NPCI is thinking about taking UPI to other markets and selling the story so that it finds its place in those countries or geographies.
Thank you, Ajay, for the question. In your opening remark, you talked about the UPI performance. You talked about the 2.2 billion transactions that we had in November, and this is just the financial transaction. We had same number of or equivalent number of non-financial transactions. So you talked about 2.2 billion transactions touching over $52 billion. The coverage that we have, about 175 million users on one side and around 60 million merchants active through QR codes on the other side. And just think about it, the 60 million QR codes that are live in the country, the traditional networks talk about 50 million acceptance points globally. Now, in India, we have 60 million QR codes that we have created, and that's the kind of inclusion we have driven. We've gotten merchants of the smallest of the merchants in the digital payment ecosystem. So that's the level we have achieved. When the program was launched in 2017, we processed around $8 billion worth of commerce on the platform. So that's less than 1% of India's GDP. This year, we are looking at closing over $425 billion worth of commerce, and that's around 15% of India's GDP. So that's the length and breadth of it, and that's the scale we have achieved here in this market. Now, talking about internationalization of it, we have achieved this performance that we've achieved in India on account of two things. One is the technology, the platform that is deployed in the market, and there are the features that I talked about earlier. How it's driving inclusion at an ecosystem level, how the technology is actually enabling newer use cases and things around it. So I would say that's the tech expertise part of it. Then the second is the business part of it, wherein we are deploying newer use cases to touch lives of consumers and to kind of help them meet their daily needs and actually displace cash. So that's the business part of it. Now, if you combine the tech and the business expertise both together, I think that enables us to play in different market landscapes, markets where there is no fast payment system equivalent to UPI. We can go there and collaborate with the governments. And Pia talked about digital public good. That's what we truly believe in. And we want to go to the markets and actually deliver the digital public good of the country, of the market that we go into it. So that's one part. Now, there are countries where there is an existing fast payment program, but it has not taken the shape and form as UPI has taken in here. So that's where we can go. And also touching on the last point that Pia mentioned about knowledge. So we can kind of share knowledge. We can provide advisory services to the markets where there is a fast payment system to kind of bring in that traction, bring in the penetration, and bring in real inclusion. So we are actually kind of ready on both the fronts, and we are very excited about it. This is something that we as a company truly believe in, driving digital public good, and we have started engaging with people overseas, and the response has been very positive. And we truly believe that in next couple of years we will be able to kind of create something similar or on the same lines of UPI globally.
Wow. I think whenever you speak next, you should maybe help people understand the scale that you talk about, because when you put out three numbers very quickly, I think it takes time for it to sink in. But I think if you're saying that there are 60 million QR points, the QR code points, I think it's a phenomenal outcome, because I think you mentioned that most of the card networks talk about 50 million merchants globally. I think it's indeed a success story, or I think that's the data point I think which will I think get people to start realizing that from a big store to a merchant on the street, they're able to use this as a method of payment, and that's I think that's very, very creditable. Mr. Malu, from your perspective, if NPCI was to do something like this in Kenya, do you think it finds would it be exciting enough for NPCI and for Kenya?
Yes. First of all, let me just apologize for the earlier feedback. Yes, and I would say absolutely. As Ritesh was speaking, I was thinking about a project in Kenya we call PesaLink, and PesaLink is a project by all the banks in Kenya. They've come together and basically created a real-time cash transfer platform where you can move funds, in seconds from one bank account to another. But I feel the biggest challenge that this project has faced is actually issues to do with standards and different mobile banking solutions, because every bank wants to retain its own should I say, yes, mobile banking solution. So there is no uniformity. There's been quite a bit of, I would say, misunderstanding within the market. But to me, you talked earlier about will there be ever another M-Pesa in Kenya? And this to me has the potential because we have over 14 million bank accounts, in the country. If all these accounts can be linked together and we could find a way to transact in a efficient, cost-effective way, and then create, merchant solutions, etc. There is a huge opportunity to leverage, the current mobile. Kenya is, I would say, the level of mobile penetration is very high. So it would be quite easy for banked customers to also begin transacting on a platform like this. But like I mentioned, I think where NPCI could come in is to support the standardization, because I think the biggest challenge that we face is standardization. We have just over 40 banks, and each one of them has its own mobile banking solution, its own standards, and that has created so many problems even with interfaces. Thank you.
Right. So I think, Ritesh, you have a potential market that you can reach out to, and
Absolutely.
and you can thank Carnegie for enabling this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry. Abhijit, from your perspective, how do you look at WhatsApp commitment in helping bridge the financial divide and getting more people included into this whole ecosystem? And like you said, then you being able to, or others being able to sell their services to this underserved population in the country, and also maybe in other markets, if you would like to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Listen, I think UPI and India Stack is transformational. So one of the biggest jumps and opportunities we have is to really attack financial inclusion, or the lack of financial inclusion in this country and other countries. And again, I think it comes back to what we talked about earlier. The architecture allows for exponential scale and exponential innovation. And I think it does three things, just the way the public and private partnership of all of this has come together. Number one, it reduces friction and accelerates adoption on the consumer side. So those that never had an easy way of onboarding can get onboarded. And so if you think about it, let's just take that for a second. If here, WhatsApp, for example, doesn't need to solve the problem, even though we have 400 million users. If you're an SBI customer with authentication that's guaranteed by the government because of you're using India Stack, with an app that you feel comfortable with, it could be WhatsApp or others because of convenience, security, you've solved three components of the problem that all actually make adoption very, very difficult. So on the consumer adoption side, this ecosystem, everybody does their job very well, and you can accelerate adoption at a non-linear path. So that's number one. Number two, UPI, India Stack, this framework allows us to have scalable interoperability and common compliance, which is exceptionally important. Whether you're talking about financial inclusion or you're talking about cross-border, we can talk about scale and innovation without us having to solve it, or a startup having to solve it, or a bank having to solve it, because UPI creates that framework. So as long as in India we have a common set of compliance and framework and guardrails, and that also is kind of the handshake with the other countries are there, you could talk about anything and do so within kind of the context that makes sense and will protect the consumers and businesses. Third, so common compliance and interoperability. And then third, we have the ability now, because we have these as the underpinnings of all of this, providing and guaranteeing security and kind of user experience, we can talk about exploding innovation. And hence, I'll give you an example of a pilot we just launched. In India, we have one of the most cost-effective and scalable micro-pension schemes for the underprivileged. Now, it's had a tough time scaling, as many financial inclusion services have, because not only do you have to solve the right product for the right market, but you have massive frictional loss. The cost of acquisition, especially when you're talking about micro elements, whether it's kind of a micro insurance or micro pension, given the cost, That frictional loss is too high, and hence it's very, very difficult to scale. And you spend half of your IP trying to develop distribution, cost of acquisition, user adoption, user education. If this framework allows to solve for the latter, you as an innovator can focus on the former, which is what is the right way of creating the right product for micro pension. And you plug that innovation into the platforms on top of the UPI framework with consumer adoption in place. And now we're talking about scale. That's what's transformative about here. We can probably take any innovative startup, any innovative regulated entity or product at a micro level, significantly reduce the distribution and frictional cost of adoption, and then scale and bring kind of financial inclusion to truly hundreds of millions of people here and across the world.
Wow. So I like this micro pension idea actually, which I think you were talking about, where people can maybe buy bite-sized or invest bite-sized into their pension, or rather their, even I think you could do it for insurance also if you're doing it for pension.
We also launched insurance as well. And I think the experimental nature of Bangalore and the ecosystem, that startup culture is there. We're not trying to solve it, but State Bank of India's general insurance firm is doing sachet-sized COVID insurance and medical insurance, which will be distributed at scale. Same with the pensions, and we're working with kind of startups there. When you're talking about 200 rupee, 300 rupee, 400 rupee products, the frictional cost of distribution matters. And actually, the economics don't work. When you actually take away all of that with the technology that we have, now all of a sudden these are viable business models that can actually reach everybody.
Very interesting. Shifting gears to Mahendra, Mahendra, one of the things that I think we were discussing earlier is the fact that there was this reference by Google to the Fed saying that they should look at UPI. And I think in the US they are working on a real-time payment system called FedNow, which is likely to happen in the next, I think, by 2023. So do you, how, given where you sit, how does UPI as a framework for a market like US look to you, and what would your advice to Ritesh be before he ventures into the US?
Yeah, I think clearly there is a replicable model that UPI has given that I think is very can be templatized for a lot of developing countries with a high cash penetration, right? And I think, as Ritesh alluded, you could look at replicating it in various different ways. You can actually power the same stack in other countries, or you can actually take the learnings and export them to other countries. Because I think what UPI overall is a culmination of a lot of other things that the India stack powers. And there's a lot of good work that has been done in terms of infrastructure, policy, corporate governance, user experience, go-to-market, that I think is a playbook that can be templatized for a lot of developing countries. I think when you start thinking about more developed countries where some of these problems may not exist in terms of friction in payments, cash, I think there is still opportunities to identify specific use cases and specific pockets where it may not be as widespread a problem of making basic payments, but there may still be specific opportunities. And you're seeing that innovation in some of those countries, whether it is a offline in-store payment powered through various new technologies, whether it is P2P payments. So while you have very robust existing bank-powered, network-powered payment networks, there are players that are innovating very rapidly, whether it is in terms of face-to-face payments, whether it is in terms of P2P, whether it is in terms of lending, micro-lending, and so on and so forth. And I think there is a lot of, again, first principle learnings from the UPI experience that can be exported there. I think the third opportunity that I see is more intimate to the Indian consumer, which is today the Indian consumer benefits from UPI in that it is a great customer experience, interoperable, but only within India. If I have to buy something on Amazon.com and not on Amazon.in, I can't use UPI. If I carry my phone outside of the country and I'm visiting London or Sydney or wherever, I can't use UPI. Right. So allowing the customer, today I can use the same Amazon app to shop in multiple marketplaces. I can use the same WhatsApp app to communicate with my friends in India as well as in the US, but I cannot use UPI. So if you just put the Indian consumer at the center and say, hey, like UPI has democratized payments for the Indian consumer, but in India, can we internationalize it, right? Like, so can we make online cross-border easy? Can we make face-to-face international payments easy? So I think there are so many opportunities to think about as we think about internationalization. And then as again, speaking from a vantage point of a merchant, I think the problems that we face with payments in India do exist in several other locales for us, whether that is of cash habituation, credit starvation, kind of a not robust digital payment system. So I think I do see huge replication potential. And I think if we identify the right use cases, I think the harder problem is not going to be the technology architecture. The harder problem is the other pieces that NPCI got right in India, the India stack got right in India. And how do you enable those? Because see, as much as we talk about payments, we forget that BBPS is another big invention, right? Without BBPS, each one of us will be figuring out how to connect with Telangana electricity and all that. So how do you enable all these? It's not one thing. I think UPI is just a big jigsaw puzzle that has come together. And how do you scale that in other locales? I think it's it's the potential is there. I think a bunch of things need to fall in place. And I think the template is there. If there is enough political will in those countries, I think this thing can take off, and NPCI can play a huge role in making it international.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very interesting perspective and a point of view which I think puts it all together to say that how a solution, while it's just a technology, but it's a full ecosystem of participants, of technology, of additional services that happen around it, and also I would say the different kinds of players who've worked on it to make it I would say as ubiquitous as what it is today. So Pia, from your perspective, when you hear these kind of conversations, and I think Mahendra touched upon this point of enabling remittances or cross-border kind of transactions. I think cost of remittances and how remittances happen is one of the areas which a number of organizations talk about, that they're high, they take time, and from your point of view, would something like a UPI and an ability to do or enable cross-border transactions be a thing which helps, I would say, remittances by workers or organizations or people who are less included in this whole thing also be relevant?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we heard it also earlier about possibilities of the standards being set just so that the systems can enable these cross-border transactions, and definitely this will lower the friction costs, as Abhijit mentioned several times, about how that will drive greater efficiencies and adoption. So for sure that will enable lowering the costs of making those payments. But again, Ajay, just to emphasize that payments, when we look at financial inclusion, having an access, having an account, making payments is really just one part of the journey, and it's really more about what financial products now become available to these people. What are these products suitable to their needs and their capacities, and is it improving their financial well-being, for example. So we heard about micro pension and micro and maybe digital credit. And so we have to take into consideration how, yes, through payments they are included, and it's a first step. It's a doorway into accessing a broader range of financial services. And now it's really incumbent to make sure that these financial services really address their needs. So similar to remittances, we look at the cost as one aspect, but then now when the remittances come, we have to also look at how the remittances are used for development. So do those beneficiary families, for example, have access to an account or credit to start a business? So it's not just one thing. When we look at building these digital public goods, as Mahendra said, it's not just one thing. It's a big puzzle that you have to put together. Similarly, with the inclusive finance for development that we want to see, it is not just usage and access, but it's really leading to access to better services where they are protected, where they truly benefit from this. So it's also on that end, a lot of different aspects that we need to make sure so that the benefits of all these transformational innovation really lead to good, positive development outcomes.
Yeah, I think the fact that you talk about these couple of things. So in India, in addition to the three things which people have mentioned, which is around UPI, India Stack, there is another piece of work that is happening, which is around data, which is a framework called account aggregators, and it has an interesting consent architecture around it, wherein you can now share data across financial institutions or other organizations in a manner that I, as a customer, can decide who gets it. So there's an interesting framework developing around it. And like you mentioned, there are some organizations which are trying to use a UPI handle on a credit store of value. So normally, most of the UPI handles are on an account store of value, which is almost like a prepaid store of value. I put my money in a bank, and now I have a handle. But I think there are some organizations who are trying to give the same handle to a credit store, and therefore this entire 60 million touch points which Ritesh mentioned can suddenly be accessed using your pool of credit also. So that's the kind of work that's happening. Coming back to Ritesh, what are the 2-3 things that you would like to happen as you access different markets and you take UPI international? Are there some markets that you are targeting currently in the near term?
So. And I'm going to touch upon one of the aspects that Mahendra mentioned, which is around expanding the usage universe for an Indian consumer. So besides this co-creation or collaboration to create something like UPI in different ecosystems, the other thing that we are working around is also kind of expand the remit of a consumer and also to include other places where he or she can transact while traveling. Now, coming to your question, what are the things that we are doing currently? So we are pursuing multiple lines of businesses. One is definitely working with actually reaching out to governments and other foreign central banks to explore deployment of something like UPI. So that's what we are doing. The other is we are working on increasing the acceptance footprint of UPI-based apps, as well as the RuPay card that we issue here in India. I mean, we have 600 million RuPay cards in circulation, and we are working to kind of expand their acceptance footprint. Last month, we had our first international issuance. So we launched a first RuPay card in Bhutan, which was actually inaugurated by the honorable prime ministers of both the country. So we are also looking at targeting markets wherein RuPay cards can be issued. And of course, there are a lot of opportunities in that area. People come to India for medical tourism. People come to India for education. So we could kind of look at this use case as well. Now, apart from that, we are also looking at the remittance piece. I mean, India is the number one market when it comes to foreign inward remittances. We receive around $80 billion every year. Now, we are looking at how UPI can be deployed in that kind of space. The current remittance, cross-border remittance piece, if you look at it, is very fragmented. There are places, there are bank bilaterals, there are places it runs on, I would say dated rails, and there are places MTOs are working. So there is no uniformity there. And there are identified challenges like speed of transaction, cost of transaction, transparency around it, and also accessibility. And these are all identified pain points. And we are looking at, collaborating in this space with partners on the other side to kind of bring in efficiency, to kind of bring in speed, and also reduce the cost of remittance for these transactions. So these are some of the things that we are looking at focusing when we are going overseas. And and you talked about Bharat Bill Pay. That's something also is very exciting. It's transformational. So maybe those things as well are at our disposal. And whenever there is a need in the international markets, we are going to take these kind of solutions in the international market.
So Victor, as we come towards, I'm being told that we are nearing our time and we need to get into Q&A. I wanted to ask you that the story of mobile and digital begins with M-Pesa to some extent. Do you see any parallels, or do you see what are the learnings that UPI team can use as they go on this journey of expanding into other markets? You're on mute, Victor.
Yes, sorry about that. So, as you said, yes, the story of M-Pesa is a very interesting one, and we learn, new things almost every other day. So, maybe a couple of things I would want to mention that we are learning as we go forward is that trust is a very important component in any payments platform. And the reason I'm saying that is that some of the newer platforms that have been launched after M-Pesa have suffered from challenges or what we call a deficit of trust. So, and I think, NPCI and UPI have managed to achieve that quite effectively. I think the other area that we are looking at is usefulness. We always, to some extent, thought that affordability was a major issue, and it is. I'm not trying to downplay the importance of affordability, but usefulness seems to be something that sometimes when we are designing financial solutions, we don't look at it from the user's perspective. How useful is it to them? Because what we've noticed, especially with individuals where either bank accounts or even mobile wallets become dormant, what they ask us is, how is this helping me on a day-to-day basis? And how does this link to the real economy? How will this help me to pay my school fees, to pay for my health care, and various other useful things? I think maybe just to mention, I don't think people wake up thinking I need a bank account or I need a mobile wallet. I think what they say is, I need to pay school fees, I need to save money for my pension, I need health care. And then they seek a financial solution that can solve that problem for them. So if I was to just leave you with one thought, it's about looking at the consumer or the customer and asking ourselves, how can we help them make their lives better? Not about creating a solution that somehow is commercially viable or is exciting for us, and trying to create a better and better widget. So that would be my advice, that we really need to keep thinking about how we can create solutions that can be trusted and that are useful for the consumer. Thank you.
Yes, and we have some questions, and the first question that we have is actually it touches upon something which Priya said in the beginning, and Victor also mentioned. And see, it's about given that that NPCI has been wildly successful, and the fact that NPCI does a variety of things in India. There was a talk in India that should there be another set of payment system providers. and the central bank put out a note asking for and Pia being from the central bank, she can also give her point of view on this. What they have now done is that they have said that they have opened it up for organizations and for players to participate and to give a proposal to the central bank that they would like to set up payment systems nationally in India. So I think the first question that we have, and I think maybe all the participants should comment on it, is is payments a commercial business or is payments a public good? And should national rails for payments be available for, or rather be in the private domain? Because, and when RBI has asked for people to give a proposal for this new umbrella entity, as they call it, they have said that this business can be for profit. Interestingly, National Payments Corporation of India is a not-for-profit organization today. The organization, the parent organization of Ritesh, which runs UPI and a lot of other payment systems, is a not-for-profit in India. And this time, the central bank has said that you can have a for-profit proposal to the central bank. So the question we have from one of the participants is that A, does it make sense to do this? B, should it be for profit? As far as the national rails or payment rails are concerned in a country. We'll start with Pia.
Thank you, Ajay, and I'll answer that, linking to again the message about digital public goods that I mentioned earlier. I mean, this also includes principles of interoperability, but it also includes policies and regulations that enable competition, for example, and level playing field in terms of the players. So there's no yes or no answer. I think that's my safe answer, because it will be what is really suited to the market. And I'll also maybe in my former hat, again as being part of the central bank, is that we have to be open in terms of business models and innovations. And in payments, there could definitely be, it's a classic space where there could be public-private cooperation. There could also be private-private cooperation where there's an agreement on where they can cooperate and where they can compete. So there could be those spaces, and as long as the policy and regulatory environment is clear, and at the end of the day, it benefits customers in terms of transparent costs, lowered costs, and better service. I think those are the policy objectives that policymakers need to keep in mind. So those are two perspectives on that, Ajay. Thank you.
Yeah, Mahendra? I think we are also running out of time, so it could also be part of closing comments from all of you.
Yeah, and I think that my short answer is I think more the participants, the better, as a general principle. But I will also counter that by saying that the bar that the NPCI has set is already pretty high. So I think whatever has to come has to be materially better than that. Only then whatever the profits would emerge. So while there is a provision for profit, doesn't automatically allow you to extract profits. So I think the bar that NPCI has set is pretty high in terms of every dimension, and whatever this new entity structure would be, we'll have to beat that and more to make profits. Is my take.
Victor?
Yeah, I'm with Pia on this one. I think it's a difficult one to sort of look from exactly whether it should be public or private. And I'll just give maybe two perspectives. One is, if this was a railroad, would you want the same person who owns the rail tracks also driving the wagons? And would it be possible to separate the two so that you have the rails and then you have different people driving the wagons, because the owner of the railroad could favor their own rail wagons, for example. I hope that makes sense. But that to me is a challenge. There are also issues sometimes around market share. If one, you have a very dominant player, especially a state-owned one, whether that encourages innovation and or whether that could stifle innovation and competition. But like I said, I think there's no straight answer. It depends on the market and the policy and regulatory approach of the state. Thank you.
Abhijit, you have comments on the NUE and any closing comments?
Yeah, I think on this, I think again, Pia, I think kicked us off correctly, which is like, look, while I said the end goal, of course, is access to services, not payments. Payments is core to unlocking digitization, and payments is core to unlocking our economy and kind of the growth of our economy here in India and abroad, and harnessing kind of whatever potential we have. So it's important for payments to scale. And under that, you need to make sure that it's kind of strictly interoperable, compliant. There's a policy element that it has to comply with. It has to be good for the customer and transparent for the customer. It has to have a minimal level of quality, as Mahendra talked about, and I think it's got to be scalable. As long as you check those boxes, it does. To me, it's kind of up to the model and up to the market to decide what's the right thing. But we need to make sure that payments is accelerated as a country. So I think, neutral on whatever the right answer is, I think the market will figure out, but we just need to make sure that we create the right environment for payments to scale. Because as part of my closing comments, I think we're sitting on an inflection point right now. Whatever we've done till now, I don't think we've seen the potential, because that jigsaw puzzle is coming and converging now. So what you see in the next 5 years, everything we've talked about, by the way, not hypothetical, not theoretical, that those convergences are happening, and I think we're at the beginning. So we really need to keep accelerating. Make sure customers have the confidence and convenience to get onboarded. Make sure we have interoperability and compliance sorted out through common frameworks. And 3, make sure built on top of that is innovation. So just that perfect product by the people who understand the product market fit can get to the market with scalable cost models and cost effectiveness.
Right. Before Ritesh, given the fact that he's in the hot seat, where before he talks about, I just wanted to mention that, in India today, we do about 40 billion payment transactions annually. And the thought is in some circles that this should reach about 400 billion transactions a year in 4 to 6 years' time. So it's the 10x growth that people are looking at in this market as more and more things formalize, whether it's transit, whether it's payments, whether it is your phones, all of these things. And that's what is causing the excitement in the payments market, let alone the services on top, which Abhijit and Mahendra and others have spoken about. So that's the kind of excitement that people have in India. Ritesh, last words to you on the NUE and any other comments that you have.
So, thank you for that. Ajay, you talked about 3 things: financial motivation, you talked about digital public good, you talked about private ownership, and I would also add the point Mahendra mentioned, which is around innovation, and then Victor talked about trust. So there are a lot of moving parts in here. And what I would say is that in RBI, we have a very progressive regulator. They are truly kind of supportive of what we have done, and they're taking a very futuristic outlook around this. So that's my parting comment. And for sure, I don't know how this is going to pan out, but RBI is kind of, I'm sure, doing what they think is right.
Well, I think as we come to close, it's been a fantastic conversation, and I think we did see different perspectives, whether they were from the M-Pesa side or from a large merchant or a large platform, a central bank view, and then people like Ritesh who are executing and getting this to happen. So thank you very much, and wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you. Great being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.